In 1959, Ferrari should have been untouchable. It had more money, more power, and the most feared racing cars in the world. Then, a tiny British team arrived with a car that looked completely wrong. Its engine sat behind the driver. It had only 4 cylinders. And its gearbox came from a Citroen road car. Ferrari expected to destroy it. Instead, this small, underpowered machine humiliated them at their home race, won the world championship, and forced every Formula One team to redesign its cars. This is the story of the Cooper T51, the car that made Formula One realize it had been building racing cars backwards. During the early years of the Formula One World Championship, the basic shape of a Grand Prix car seemed almost unquestionable. The engine belonged at the front. The driver sat behind it, surrounded by fuel tanks, with a drive shaft running through the car toward the rear wheels. This arrangement produced the long bonnets and exposed cockpits that had defined racing for decades. Mercedes-Benz had won with it, Maserati had won with it, Alfa Romeo had won with it, and Ferrari had built its reputation around it. There had been rear-engined racing cars before, but the concept was generally regarded as unusual, unreliable, or simply unsuitable for the highest level of motorsport. Cooper never set out to challenge that belief, at least not at first. The company's origins were far removed from the enormous racing departments of Italy and Germany. Charles Cooper operated a small garage in Surbiton. After the Second World War, he and his son John began constructing a lightweight racing car for the new 500cc category. They did not have access to a vast engineering department or an unlimited supply of purpose-built components. Their first car was assembled using parts taken from 2 Fiat Topolinos. The engine was a compact motorcycle unit, and the simplest way to connect it to the rear wheels was to place it directly behind the driver and use a chain drive. It was not a revolutionary statement. It was simply the most practical solution. But almost by accident, Cooper had created a racing car with its heaviest components concentrated near the center. There was no long engine ahead of the front axle, no drive shaft running beneath the driver, and no enormous bonnet obstructing the airflow. The little Cooper was compact, light, and easy to control. It began winning. Soon, Cooper was producing cars for private customers, many of whom discovered that these strange, rear-engined machines were far more competitive than they appeared. The company gradually moved into faster categories, using larger Coventry Climax engines while retaining the same basic layout. By 1958, the idea had reached Formula One. At the season-opening Argentine Grand Prix, Sterling Moss drove a rear-engined Cooper to victory. The car was entered by Rob Walker's private team, and its win was initially treated as an unusual combination of low weight, clever strategy, and extreme heat. Then Maurice Trintignant won the next race in Monaco with another Cooper. Suddenly, the victory in Argentina no longer looked like an accident. But the championship still went to Mike Hawthorne and Ferrari. The traditional front-engined car had survived for the moment. What followed in 1959 was not a gradual transition, it was a takeover. Cooper's new weapon was the T51. Like the cars before it, the T51 used a tubular chassis and placed its engine behind the driver, but it was now powered by a full 2.5-liter Coventry Climax engine producing around 239 horsepower. Ferrari's front-engined Dyno 246 produced approximately 280. On the straights, the Ferrari had a clear advantage. It had 6 cylinders instead of 4, more power, and the resources of one of the greatest racing manufacturers in the world. The Cooper could not simply accelerate past it. Instead, it attacked everything around the engine. Because the heavy components were concentrated toward the center, The T51 could change direction more quickly. With less weight overall, it placed less stress on its brakes and tires. Its small frontal area created less resistance. And as fuel was consumed during a race, its handling remained more predictable than that of many front-engined rivals. The Cooper did not need to overpower the Ferrari, it simply needed to waste less of what it had. But this elegant layout contained some surprisingly crude engineering. Suitable rear transaxles were difficult to obtain because almost nobody was building rear-engined Formula One cars. The works Coopers used a heavily modified gearbox derived from a front-wheel drive Citroen. It was mounted behind the engine and forced to handle far more power than its original designers had ever intended. After races, gears, selector components, and other internal parts often had to be replaced. The Rob Walker cars, driven by Stirling Moss, used a different 5-speed Colati gearbox. It offered an extra gear, but it could be even more fragile. The future of Formula One, therefore, depended on a small 4-cylinder racing engine connected to transmissions that were permanently close to destroying themselves. The first championship race of 1959 took place at Monaco. Its narrow streets reduced Ferrari's power advantage and rewarded a car that could brake late and change direction quickly. Stirling Moss placed his Cooper on pole position, but it was Jack Brabham, driving for the factory team, who would make history. Brabham was not the typical image of a glamorous Grand Prix driver. He was a mechanic and engineer as much as a racer. Quiet, physically strong, and deeply involved in the preparation of his cars, he understood exactly what the Cooper needed. When Moss retired with transmission trouble, Brabham took control. He crossed the line 20 seconds ahead of Tony Brooks' Ferrari. It was Brabham's first World Championship victory. It was also the first championship win for Cooper's factory team. Ferrari had been beaten, but Monaco was an unusual circuit. A small, nimble car winning there did not necessarily mean the established order had collapsed. The British Grand Prix at Aintree removed that excuse. Brabham started from pole position. He led the opening lap, then the next, and the next. For 75 laps, nobody passed him. The Cooper controlled the entire race and finished more than 20 seconds ahead of the field. Bruce McLaren, Brabham's young teammate, completed the podium in another Cooper. The little British team was no longer stealing occasional victories. It was controlling Grand Prix. Ferrari could still fight back on faster circuits. Tony Brooks won in France, where the long straights allowed the dyno's more powerful engine to dominate. Ferrari also controlled the German Grand Prix at the extremely fast AVUS circuit. The old layout was not suddenly useless. In the right conditions, Ferrari's speed remained devastating. That made the battle more significant. This was not a season in which one team had simply built the fastest car. It was a conflict between two completely different ideas. Ferrari relied on power, tradition, and the ability to attack. Cooper relied on low weight, balance, and efficiency. At the Portuguese Grand Prix, Stirling Moss showed just how effective that efficiency could be. Driving Rob Walker's dark blue T51, Moss qualified on pole by approximately 2 seconds. During the race, he set the fastest lap. Then he disappeared. By the finish, Moss had lapped every other car. Second place belonged to another Cooper. The best Ferrari finished third, an entire lap behind the winner. Moss had not merely defeated the opposition, he had made the race look as though the Cooper belonged to a different category. The next round was held at Monza, Ferrari's home race, a circuit dominated by high speeds and long periods at full throttle. If there was one place where a powerful front-engine Ferrari should have defeated the smaller Cooper, it was here. Ferrari planned to use its speed aggressively. Its drivers would push hard, stop for fresh tires, and then attack again. Rob Walker's team saw another possibility. The Cooper was lighter and gentler on its tires. Instead of trying to match Ferrari's raw pace, Moss would attempt to complete the entire Grand Prix without changing them. It was a gamble. If the tires failed, the race would be lost. If Moss drove too slowly to protect them, the Ferraris would disappear. But the strategy worked. Ferrari's cars stopped. Moss continued. When the race ended, the small privateer Cooper crossed the line 46 seconds ahead of Phil Hill's Ferrari. It had defeated Ferrari at Monza without being the fastest car in a straight line. The Cooper had used less fuel, placed less stress on its components, and required less from its tires. The very qualities that made it look small and underpowered had won the race. Cooper secured the Constructors' Championship on Ferrari's home ground. For more stories about the machines that changed racing by refusing to follow the rules, subscribe to Hidden Car Gems. Because Cooper had won the manufacturer's title, but Jack Brabham still had to survive one final race, the first United States Grand Prix to count toward the Formula One World Championship was held at Sebring in December 1959. 3 drivers could still take the title. Brabham led the standings, but Sterling Moss and Ferrari's Tony Brooks remained within reach. Moss started from pole and immediately pulled away. If his Cooper remained reliable, the championship could still be his. But reliability had always been the car's weakness. After only a few laps, the Colati gearbox failed, Moss was out. Brooks's chances were damaged in an early collision, leaving Brabham in control of the championship. For most of the race, the factory Coopers of Brabham and Bruce McLaren ran at the front. Brabham appeared to have done enough. Then, on the final lap, his engine began to misfire. The Cooper was running out of fuel. McLaren passed him and continued toward the finish, closely followed by Maurice Trintignant. McLaren won by just 0.6 of a second, becoming the youngest Formula One Grand Prix winner the sport had seen at that time. Brabham's car stopped approximately 400 yards from the line. He no longer needed to finish to secure the championship. Moss was already out, and Brooks could not score enough points to overtake him. But Brabham climbed from the cockpit and began to push. After hours of racing in the Florida heat, he forced the fuel-starved Cooper toward the finish. The car that had spent the season defeating larger, richer, and more powerful rivals completed its final race without an engine. Brabham crossed the line in 4th place and collapsed from exhaustion. The mechanic from Australia was world champion. Cooper had won both titles. The team had achieved it with a workforce that was tiny compared with Ferrari, using an engine originally developed from a design connected to a wartime fire pump project and a chassis layout born from the need to simplify a chain drive. The significance extended far beyond the trophies. Before the T51, placing the engine behind the driver was still viewed as an alternative. After the T51, it became the answer. Other manufacturers began abandoning the front engine layout. Ferrari initially resisted, but it could no longer ignore what was happening. In 1960, the company began racing its own rear-engined Formula One prototype. By 1961, Ferrari's rear-engined 156 had won the World Championship. The company that Cooper had defeated was now following the same principle. The T51 did not invent rear-engined racing, but it proved the layout could defeat the best cars in the world across an entire championship. Almost every successful Formula One car built since has followed the basic arrangement Cooper demonstrated in 1959. The driver sits ahead of the engine, the weight is concentrated near the center, and the shape of the car is designed around that layout. Modern Formula One cars may contain hybrid systems, advanced aerodynamics, and materials that engineers in 1959 could barely have imagined. But beneath that technology, the fundamental architecture remains familiar. Ferrari entered the season with more power, more money, and more history. Cooper arrived with a smaller car and a better idea. And once that idea began winning, Formula One could never go back.